I've just read my first romantasy novel, Clockwork Angel by Cassandra Clare. And it's not to say that it's the first like romantic slash fantasy book that I've read. It's just the first like book of this modern crop of books that are published under this particular portmanteau. What I didn't know picking it up was that it was set in London, which was a nice surprise, given that I'm also in London. And it's like kind of Victorian steampunk, like demons and angels fighting each other. The point is that like the London setting was something that I really like enjoyed out in the novel. And I know like the whole Victorian London setting is something which, you know, really does it for a lot of people. Traditionally, I've not counted myself among that group, but maybe I'm changing. I don't know, but like maybe something has changed in me that made this particular setting just like make the book really like elevated. I don't know, but I thought there's so many books set in London, what are the best ones? And so I decided to make a little list ranking the books in like depending on how well the writers make use of the London setting. Or maybe another way to put it is just like how much I liked reading about London in those books. Two honourable mentions come first: The Buddha of Suburbia by Hanif Kureishi and Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. Isn't this a nice little addition? I did these both for university, so I read them when I was like 18, and I feel like London is really important in both of these novels. I enjoyed them both. I enjoyed the Charles Dickens a bit more than the Hanif Kureishi. But honestly, I don't really remember how London was used in them. Like, it doesn't stick in my memories at all. I just feel like if I read them again, I'd be like, yeah, London was so important in that book and the way it was used is really interesting, blah, blah, blah. But I don't remember, so they're not going on the list. The book that I do very much remember from university is Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. And you can see from like all these little notes, like how much I was thinking about this book and writing about this book. It's kind of the quintessential, well, a quintessential London novel. Like it's even got this little map. I love a map. Don't we all love a map in a book? But it's like kind of very much the center of London, contrasted with something like, you know, Buddha of Suburbia, like which I think is more like kind of the outskirts or greater London. This is very much like zone one stuff. And that suits the story because it's the story of a woman, Clarissa Dalloway, who is kind of high society. I want to say like upper middle class, like she's married to a politician. So, you know, not like an aristocrat or something, but, you know, like moving in higher circles, let's say. And she's putting on a party. And so she's going around, like, I think to get flowers or stuff. But the novel is stream of consciousness following different characters moving around London, and like just walking through the center of London is something which is so nice to do. So like reading about people doing that and sort of showing how urban space shapes the rhythms of daily life and like kind of how people structure their thoughts and stuff like that is something which I find really fascinating, and which, you know, if that was the plug for this book, then I would say it's gotta be something I really love. But love this book, I do not. Like I just opened to a random page before doing this video and I saw a bit I'd underlined, and instantly I knew why I'd underlined it, because it was like, okay, yeah, this is kind of why I don't like this book. A car drives by and it's like the Queen or the Prime Minister, they don't know. It's just like kind of a, you know, a blacked out windows kind of fancy car. And a bunch of people, like everyone on the street turns their head as it drives by. And like the book is describing like this moment, you know, that unites people. It says something so trifling in single instances that no mathematical instrument, though capable of transmitting shocks in China, could register the vibration. Yet in its fullness, rather formidable, and in its common appeal emotional, for in all the hat shops and tailor shops, strangers looked at each other and thought of the dead, of the flag, of empire. I bet there was like one person at least who didn't think of flags and empire when a rich person's car drives by. You know what I mean? Like there's this image of a tree, and I think it's in this book, not just my imagination of what this book is like. I'm pretty sure it's in actually a description in the book of the people in London being like the tips of branches of a tree, but all those branches go back to like the trunk of the tree. Right, and that trunk is like kind of like some sort of spiritual core, and that sort of like unity, I guess, is quite comforting for a lot of people. And like for me, I think evolution maybe would be the thing where I like, you know, seeing my interconnectedness with the world around me and so on. Like I have my own versions, I guess, of that tree. Maybe we all do, but in this one, the center of the tree is like just a middle class English person, who cares. And like, the reason they're thinking about empire and stuff is also because it's set after the First World War, to be fair, right? So like maybe it's a bit anachronistic to imagine, like I'm imagining like a modern London and projecting it into something which is set after World War One, in a London which was much less multicultural than the one that is now. But even then, there's always been dissenters. There's always been people who don't go along with like the kind of general outlook and sense of national unity that the ruling classes tend to have. So yeah, in my opinion, Clarissa Dalloway's London is a sham and her party is a failure, because the point of a party, like the whole thing is she's trying to put together a party and she's going to be the host and she wants to be a good host. Well, a good host brings together different people so that they can interact with each other, right? Whereas in this book, she's like just envisioning a communion of souls and like erasing all the differences of people and like reducing everybody into a middle class flag waving English woman. So Mrs. Dalloway and all her tea and scones are going to the bottom of the pile. Hashtag not my London. Bram Stoker's Dracula is up next. This book is full of iconic settings, right? It begins in the castle, like in Transylvania. We have the boat, the Demeter, like bringing him across the sea and this sort of scary haunted voyage. We have Whitby, his arrival in England in the town of Whitby. And I think actually most of the book is set in London, if I'm not wrong, but London is the least iconic. Like it almost feels like it could be set anywhere else. I just don't remember anything to do with London specifically in this book, in a book that's so like, I think settings based. But I will say that the reason why it's on this list is because like, I think it's predominantly set in London. I like the book and I like kind of what it does with London. Like, London is sort of like contrasted against, like foreignness and otherness and scary Dracula-ness. As the center of empire, of civilization and all this stuff, right? And then you've got this creepy ghoul from abroad, like kind of getting in on a boat and like infecting people and draining the blood from the women. And it's like the way that London is just sort of contrasted against that, like kind of seems to be a metaphor for people's kind of fears and like prejudices. And I don't know, it's got like a lot of symbolic weight, I think, but that's the thing, like symbolic weight. London as a concept rather than a place is interesting in this book, but it's still going to be near the bottom of the list. Next up is the Deptford Mice trilogy by Robin Jarvis. I'll put a picture of the first book here. I'm not sure if this is YA or middle grade or whatever, but it's about like these talking mice who live, I think, on the outskirts of London, and then these scary rats who live in the sewers of like central London, and they have a dark god which they worship, and the god is gonna like unleash the Black Plague again on the city, and like via the rats or something like that. I don't really remember the story or the characters. What I do remember is the sewers being quite freaky, and this idea that, again, like kind of the contrast that there's like kind of these nice bits of London where the mice live, and then there's this scary sewer network going underneath it. This idea of like a kind of an underground, freaky, magical like London with, evil divinities and stuff like that in the sewers. And like you walk around the city and you can hear the water rushing under your feet when you go over drain pipes and stuff like that. I think like had a strong effect on my imagination as a kid. Maybe the sort of geography of the city like made more of an impact on me than the story or the characters. I think another one which is probably like this is Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman, which I always wanted to read for years, but I just never got around to it. But that would probably be somewhere on this list if I'd read it back then. But there is another YA, The Ruby and the Smoke by Philip Pullman. This is another part of a big series, the Sally Lockhart series. I haven't read any of the other ones. Like I read this not as a kid, I read this as an adult. I think that's why, like, I really enjoyed it, but I also felt, do I want to read like 5 more books like this? Probably not. But I did really enjoy it, and I really like the depiction of London. It's set in like Victorian London. It's like kind of like hijinks and adventures, and it manages to do stuff with like gender, I thought, quite well, and Orientalism quite well, because like having a female protagonist in an adventure story set in, Victorian England means you have to like kind of use that setting but also feel modern, and I think that's probably quite difficult to do well. And I think Philip Pullman did a really good job. And also, yeah, like from a modern perspective, if you want to talk about that time period and why, London is so prosperous and stuff like that, like you kind of want to talk about things like factories and colonialism. And I don't remember if he talks about like the factories and stuff, but he talks about colonialism, and it's really like in the plot. It doesn't feel superfluous. Like the opium dens and the opium wars in China are like kind of the backbone in a way of the plot. Much like Babel by R.F. Kuang, which is a tiny bit set in London, but not enough set in London to be on this list, right? And also, Clockwork Angels kind of briefly talks about the Opium Wars as a minor plot point. And I just think that's so great that like loads of writers, like modern writers, seem to take into account international history when they're talking about Victorian London. And like specifically the Opium Wars in China. It makes me feel like if I read a novel set in Victorian London now and it doesn't mention the Opium Wars, I'm going to be like, come on, do better. I guess older books can kind of get away with it though, right? Like The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes by Arthur Conan Doyle. I mean, it has to be on this list, right? People think of being, you know, the chases through the foggy streets and stuff like that. And yeah, that's great. But for me, it's the making Baker Street iconic is what gets it this high spot on the list, because you know, just having the adventures all start and end in this specific area of London makes Baker Street feel so cozy and so like grounded in an actual place. And then that gives you like kind of your base, like the base in the story, but also like a base to build up adventures and stuff like that. So yeah, like for Baker Street. I haven't read the Paddington Bear books. I have a feeling if I had that, for exactly the same reasons, I will be putting Paddington Bear at exactly the same level as Sherlock Holmes here. Next we have The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. A bit like Dracula, it's more like kind of using London as a concept for contrasts, but is much more like developed, because it's not like London, the civilization, versus the foreign freaky other. Instead, it's like the different aspects of London. Dorian Gray is a young man of like good social standing, and he's very beautiful. And then he makes a sort of bargain, or he makes a wish that it's really like a Faustian bargain, right? Like a deal with the devil, but there's no devil involved. It's just he makes a wish that he will change places with his painting, in the sense that the painting will age and also become like kind of decrepit and like hideous looking, like evil. While Dorian will not age, and he will look beautiful and young and innocent, while being able to live a life of vice. So the disconcerting thing about Dorian, right, is that he can be like in one part of London enjoying high society, you know, going to fancy dinners and stuff like that, but he can also go to other parts of London where there's like brothels and gambling and seedy stuff, probably like actors and things like this. I mean, like, it is pretty ridiculous, the idea that like, you know, people who had a lot of wealth and power wouldn't go around to these areas as well. But I think like the geography of London is pretty important in this book, more than I realized it when I read it, like, which was a hot minute ago. It's the way that the social strata is mapped onto the geography of London, and Dorian is disconcerting and strange and scary because he can just move freely between all of these things, right? And we're supposed to believe that it's the magic painting which allows him to do this without having social repercussions and so on. Ironically, I think this book like exposes, or at least like explores, that sort of social duality in London of like kind of high and low in that time period, more than Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which is also set in London, and is about sort of the duality of man, and like kind of also has this morality kind of infused idea of there being kind of a high way of acting and comporting oneself, which is associated with class, obviously, and then a kind of a base instinctual one, right, which is like the Hyde thing. But yeah, like as far as I remember, that doesn't really do anything with the city itself. It's all just psychological. I don't think Jekyll and Hyde really uses London to its advantage at all, so it's not on the list. The Day of the Triffids by John Wyndham, sci-fi classic about everyone in the world going blind after we all look at some green lights in the sky one night. And also, you know, the world slowly being taken over by carnivorous plants. One of the reasons why it's so good is because like it seems quite far-fetched based on that premise, but it feels so grounded in reality. Like all of John Wyndham's stuff, the way he describes things feels so realistic. And one of the things that he uses to create that impression is London, right? Like he talks about, it's not just set in London, but a lot of it is. And like he talks about the different neighborhoods. There's this one scene in Hampstead Heath, with like people running and Triffids going across the heath and stuff. And Hampstead Heath is like a place that I don't know very well at all, but I just know that when I was like a baby, my family used to go there quite a lot. So like just having that kind of association with those words, and then like reading them in those same that words, Hampstead Heath, like in this book, made it all the more vivid for me. And yeah, this is like kind of OG post-apocalyptic fiction. So we having London as the, in a way, the base of the apocalypse, just because those are the characters that we're following there, not because like some specific event happens in London, but like seeing how society starts to collapse there. And then in scope, the novel moves out to the world, but also the characters leave London, and like they have to go back a few times for supplies and things like that. But like yeah, just seeing, like, again, using London as a sort of a center of civilization metaphor is very effective often in literature, it seems. And maybe that's one of the reasons why it's used so much. Honestly, I need to read this again because John Wyndham is one of my favorite writers, but this is the book I've read least by him. And like, I think I've only read it maybe once, again, when I was a teenager, so really need to reread. Going to another time period now, with The End of the Affair by Graham Greene. This is in the post-war, but it's like the affairs end is about an affair, right? About an end of an affair, believe it or not. But like the affair kind of ends during or just after World War II and like all the bombing of London and stuff like that, and that sort of infuses the bitter feelings of the protagonist, of the guy who is just walking around London and feeling bad and hiring people to spy on his ex and just being an overall like terrible person, to be honest. This novel is full of bitterness, right? And like I used it for the poison or like viper prompt from my snake bingo board that I did last year, and it's like, it is a poisonous book. It feels just like kind of horrible to read, and it's impressive how that period in history and like kind of the places that we see and like the bombed out buildings and the church with the bits of plaster missing from where shrapnel hit them and stuff like that. I don't know, like it all feels infused with the feelings of frustration that this guy has because he was so in love and then he got dumped. There's another book which I'm putting just above this one, but it's quite similar in a way. Keep the Aspidistra Flying by George Orwell. Similar in the sense of like a bitter man walking around London and infusing London with his bitterness. The only difference is that End of the Affair is post-war and Keep the Aspidistra Flying is pre-war. But it still feels like almost festering. Like we know like war is about to happen. And like the character kind of seems to want it to happen because like he doesn't like London, I guess. Like he doesn't like his life and he doesn't like society. He's kind of like I wouldn't say an anarchist necessarily, but he's got like some anarchist leanings through his left wing kind of ideas. And he's poor, but he kind of wants to be poor because he doesn't want to engage with capitalism, or else maybe that's just sort of his justification for being poor. Do you know what I mean? Like it's not because it's my fault, it's because like I actually want to say fuck the system, I don't need any money, there's things more important than money, blah blah blah. But anyway, yeah, he's also quite dislikable. I almost feel like I shouldn't put that book on this list because I never finished it, and it's a book that I've tried to read I think 3 times, and every time I've picked it up and I've gotten to a certain point in it where I just don't feel good and I don't want to be in that guy's head anymore, and so I put the book down. I rarely get that with books, to be honest. I nearly had it with The End of the Affair, which is why I kind of associate those 2 books together, just like being in the head of this really unpleasant narrator for quite a long time is exhausting. But I did really like The End of the Affair, and I really liked Keep the Aspidistra Flying. I just felt uncomfortable there. I just felt like unhappy, reading the book, so I didn't want to be unhappy. But I should go back. I should finish it. I should just push through the unhappiness for the greater reward I get at the end of it, hopefully, fingers crossed. We're into the top 4 now, and proving that recency bias is alive and well and a powerful force to be reckoned with. The book I just read, Clockwork Angel by Cassandra Clare, is at this spot on the list, and it's about an American girl who goes to the UK, goes to London, right, on a boat during the Victorian period. She is basically kidnapped by these 2 women who meet her at the boat and take her to their scary little house somewhere in the East End, I think. I don't know. But they teach her about magic, and they're like witches, and I don't think they're actually witches. They call them warlocks in the book. But anyway, this is a world where there is magic, there are vampires, there is the goblins, imps, angels and demons, you name it. And there's like a secret society not secret society. See, it's all secret from normal Londoners, right? Like Harry Potter or something like that. It's also a bit Buffy the Vampire Slayer, right? Because the angels have to fight the demons, and they've got swords and lots of slashing and stuff like that. But also most of the book, and what makes it a fun book, is that we're just chilling out in their little base. Like they have a little institute, which is like in a church or something. Go figure. And our main character ends up being rescued and also like living with the angels, talking about the Thames being really muddy looking, and then there's these demons around it. St. Paul's Cathedral. It's just mentioning these nice classic touristy kind of places in the steampunk, like angels and demons fighting each other, Victorian London. It's just really fun. And yeah, the cozy vibes are immaculate. Like just having these characters all hanging out in their little institute, complaining over dinner, being silly. They're all teenagers, I think, or at least the main characters are all teenagers, and they feel like teenagers. Like it's just kind of a bit dramatic and fun and earnest. Maybe I'll do a whole video about it. I don't know. There's too many things to say about that book. But yeah, the London aspects of this book were just such a pleasant surprise. The romance was terrible. I didn't care about the romance at all. It was rubbish. Yeah, the cozy vibes and the city vibes. I was really surprised actually to see that this book is part of a prequel trilogy to a whole like kind of Marvel multiverse type book thing made by the author Cassandra Clare, involving this group called the Shadowhunters. But they're not set in London, right? Like they're set in the modern day, at least the one that I saw when I was just looking this up on Wikipedia, right? They're like set in modern day America. And what I liked so much about this book was it being set in London, and some of the silliness of the English characters interacting with the American character. And like, yeah, that was like so much of the book for me. So even though I really liked it and I'm going to continue on in this series, I don't think I'm going to branch out to the other ones, because I cannot imagine enjoying this book if it wasn't set in London. Now, these top three are really kind of like in a league of their own, I think. Like they deal with London in ways which are much more interested and sophisticated than anything I've talked about so far. Beginning with probably the most creative use of London as a setting on this list, The Emperor's Babe by Bernardine Evaristo. I already talked about this book a lot recently, so I'll just link to a video where I talk about it more. But basically it's set in Roman era London. It's a teenage girl, Zuleika, who is the daughter of migrants from Nubia. She's grown up in London, and she's, again, there's the social strata, the class thing of moving from like the lower areas of London to the higher areas of London. In this case, it's interesting because there's the higher areas are Roman, like the Roman elite, and we see what London was like when it was just an outpost on the borders of an empire rather than the center of an empire, which is how it's so often represented in books as like the heart of colonial power. Here's like the fingertip of colonial power. It's like the little toe dipping into the bathwater of Celtic otherness. If the bathing person is colonial power. I don't know what I've done with this metaphor. Never mind. The point is that Roman London is such an interesting place in light of like future London, like as in modern day London, but also like Victorian era London and World War II era London and all this stuff. Like Roman London is such an interesting like counterpoint to that. Nabbing the number 2 spot is The Tower of London by Natsume Sōseki, translated by Damien Flanagan. And the edition I'm talking about here is actually like a compilation done also by Damien Flanagan of all of Natsume Sōseki's writings about London. Natsume Sōseki was a pretty like low-level academic who nonetheless got government backing or scholarship, was it? Like to go to London to study for 2 years. At that time, during the Meiji period in Japan, they were sending people out to, learn stuff about the West and bring that knowledge back to Japan and apply it there. But still, there were not a lot of Asian people in London in the early 20th century. I'm not sure exactly when he went. When did he go? Anyway, it must be like really early 1900s. Honestly, the best part about this book are his diary entries, or not really diary entries, letters. He was writing letters, but like in the form of a diary, back to his friends in Japan, including the poet Masaoka Shiki, who I mentioned in my last video, incidentally. But anyway, he had a terrible time in London, right? Like it really shows, like in between the racism and sort of that, just the feelings of otherness that he probably already felt in Japan, but are obviously like, intensified when you visibly look very different from everybody around you and you're constantly stared at. All of that made him have a really bad time. He didn't really want to go to university anymore, so he decided to get a private tutor instead. So that would be, because that would be cheaper. He spent all his money on books, and so he like would, you know, not do social things, right? Or like he would just avoid spending money on anything apart from buying books in England that he could then, you know, have shipped back to Japan. I think this probably happens to a lot of people. It's happened to me before. Like when you go to another country and live there for a bit and you just don't connect and you feel really bad and you end up sort of associating that country with your own mental decline. And like then like the weird thing is that his writing about London is so good, right? You'd expect it would just be like, I don't know, miserable and like angry towards British people or something like that. But it's great. It's really like sarcastic and self-deprecating, and like also gives you just this snapshot of the world at that time. Like he goes into the underground, right? The subway of London, and there's, you know, we think of Tokyo as having, you know, really high-tech city compared to other metropolises like today, but at that time London was the high-tech city, right? So he's writing back explaining what an underground railroad is like and how it's horrible and how like humans were not meant to be crammed into these tunnels and pushed around, and the thundering noise and all the soot and everything. But there's also like these kind of almost dreamlike sequences where he's like walking through the streets. It's very modernist, right? Like kind of there's the impressions of the fog and then the colors and being swept by the crowds between these huge towering buildings, which are probably pretty small by today's standards, but for him were gigantic, right? And then just getting whisked into a theater and seeing theater begin, you know, and like kind of, I don't know, like he's obviously impressed by the world around him. And then he goes back to Japan like after these 2 years, and is very depressed, and then like his friends convince him. They said, hey, those things that you were writing while you were in London were really good, you should keep up with this writing career, why don't you write something? And then he just becomes the most famous Japanese writer of all time, right? Like he occupies a place in Japanese literature that's only like kind of synonymous with Shakespeare, I think, in English literature, even though obviously he's a whole different school of writing and stuff like that. Anyway, the point is that like what happened in London, right? What happened in London that awakened all this stuff in him? And I think Damien Flanagan, in compiling this stuff, is also like interested in like what happened in London that made this guy like not only really sad, but also kind of unlock all this writing kind of power that he had, that when he went back to Japan, you know, like drawing on those experiences, he ends up becoming you know, such a great writer. I think one of the things that makes me love Natsume Sōseki's depictions of London so much is that he's got that outsider's eye, you know, and like he's got that ability to like pick out certain details that I feel it's difficult to pick out if you live in a place and you're so used to it as just being like kind of the normal way that a city works. He manages to get the strangeness of it, as well as like the wonder and the silliness and the stuffiness as well. And that outsider's eye is also in the first spot on this list, the number one book, my number one depiction of London in literature, which is Sam Selvon's The Lonely Londoners. This is about the Windrush generation. It's about the people who came from the Caribbean islands at the request of the British government after World War II to basically rebuild London and rebuild like England. So loads of people came on boats. One of the main boats was called the Windrush, which is why they're called the Windrush generation. Moses is this guy who's been in London for a few years. He's the guy who goes to the station to get people who've just come off the boat and help them integrate into London. Maybe find them a place to stay or let them know somewhere where they can go to try and find work. Things like this, right? For people from the Caribbean community. It's that sense of community inside like a city which is asking you for your labor, you know, and has invited you there, but at the same time doesn't really have a welfare system to greet you and help you. And it hasn't set up anything to really help you survive in this foreign, cold, wet place, right? So it's a way that the people help each other and build up a whole new level of London, right? Like through existing there and bringing their culture there and so on. And while also finding the London of the time, the 1950s London, very, like I said, like strange and damp. It's also great because like it doesn't feel like the people from the Caribbean are just one monolithic culture, like being implanted into the UK. I'm going to go back to like Dracula or something. No, it's like, it's not like the foreign other is just like kind of infecting England or something like that. Like they're all different people. And this book is sort of like a picaresque novel. And we jump from all these different characters who are just like living their lives and having their little stories. There isn't like one overarching narrative, really, unless you say it's like the narrative of these people in London, right? But yeah, we see all these different people who actually feel like different people. It's not like Mrs. Dalloway, right? This is the anti-Mrs. Dalloway. All the characters feel distinct, while at the same time we can understand how they're all Londoners, and also the people of different social status, and like the white people who already live in the city and stuff, they're also Londoners, right? And there is something which connects them all, but at the same time it doesn't erase the differences at all. The differences are what stands out the most. Let me read you the first sentence to give you like a sense of the prose as well. One grim winter evening, when it had a kind of unrealness about London, with the fog sleeping restlessly over the city and the lights showing in the blur as if it's not London at all, but some strange place on another planet, Moses Alouetta hop on a number 46 bus at the corner of Chepstow Road and Westbourne Grove to go to Waterloo to meet a fellow who was coming from Trinidad on the boat train. That mix of strangeness and otherworldliness, but also like gritty realness, and like the difficulties of surviving, and all these culture clashes which are often quite funny, but also show you some of the hypocrisies of the society at that time. It's fantastic. So there you go, my number one London novel. That said, there are loads of London novels that I haven't read, loads of really famous ones as well. Like probably Oliver Twist or like a bunch of other Charles Dickenses could have gone on this list, but I've only read Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. So whether it's Oliver Twist or whatever, what is your favorite London novel? Let me know down in the comments what I've missed, or even if it's not your favorite one, just like a noteworthy one. It's quite interesting, I think, like having so many different books and so many different genres aimed at different demographics and ages and so on, like all being set in the same city and all depicting that city in different ways. Just like a really interesting angle to get when you're like kind of looking at a group of books, I think. But anyway, that's been me, that's been my list, and I'll catch you in the next video. Bye.